problems yesterday, but I think we've got them worked out. Kevin, what is happening in your neck of the woods? Obviously, your offices are downtown in Austin. For those of you who don't know you, Austin native, been here for your whole life, been in real estate for 25 years.
Yeah, 26 years this year.
Yeah,
And you're a mortgage banker, right? You're now over 30 years in the mortgage originating.
maybe it's this
Awesome.
way.
That's awesome. But
Yeah,
also native Texan and been in Austin since you were just a wee little lad.
a wee
We
little lad.
actually we lived on the same street. We didn't know it as kids. We lived on the same street on Bluebonnet Lane down in
Yeah,
78704.
that's right. I was that little kid. I was throwing rocks at you. You're a little
Yeah.
punk. You're a little punk kid running around wanting to be everybody's friend, like a little yippity rabbit. Hey John. Hey John. What you doing? So,
Uh,
give me some insight. I mean, everybody, whoever you ask, you get a different answer nowadays when it comes to
yeah.
Central Texas real estate. I mean, it's from, I can't believe that anything's ever happening. Nobody's buying anything. I'm quitting the business on the mortgage side or the real estate side. To oh, I'm killing it. I've found a niche out there that I'm really exploiting, and everything's going great. What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think a lot of what I want to do on this conversation is reference those big picture and then focus in, big picture, focus in. That big picture is probably important to start with. And let's go back to COVID when a lot of spending patterns were changed. People had rediverted vacation budgets towards home improvements. We saw a lot of swimming pools going into homes, and the way that people were spending on residential real estate really changed. I think that allocation of total budget was increased into the residential real estate category. Real estate television became even more popular than it was in the past. And so these boxes that we were locked inside of became fairly important, right? Some of those patterns coming out of that are still interesting, right? We talk about this, there's a bit of a hangover effect on return to work and the way that it's influencing office and office space in and around the country, but here in Austin too. So Austin's the #2 city in the return to work percentages, but it's still fairly low. I think we're still well under 70%, maybe really in the 60s on return to work. And that means that there's a lot of empty office space.
I mean, there's a
Um,
lot of empty office space. I think one of the major ones we see anytime you drive downtown is that the Google building.
it is, yeah. And the meta space, they're paying a rent rate, they're paying their rent. That's at 6 in Guadalupe. That's the new tallest building, but it's on the sublease market. There's actually a rumor. I don't think we can necessarily drop the full rumor on this platform, but I'll say that there's a large tech company who is coming to Austin, who is rumored to have taken that whole sublease space. So there are a lot of bright spots in Central Texas as far as employment creation. What's happening with Tesla has a big follow-on effect. So already Central Texas had a lot of support for auto manufacturing, like parts manufacturers because of Toyota in San Antonio. And Tesla has played off of that, and also that adds fuel to the fire with Tesla being here now. We're seeing some other auto manufacturers that are looking at our region. And to me, that makes sense because cars today, you know, my car's 4 or 5 years old, but just looking at what's coming out now, these are more like computers on wheels anymore. The car is really a tech thing rather than an automotive thing anymore. And
Yeah,
so it makes sense. It makes sense for the forefront of what's happening with the electrification of cars and the sort of technology side of cars that
yeah,
they're
and I
looking at
think there's a
Central
big
Texas.
push on the chip side too to bring that back to the states, right? Away from places like Taiwan and South Korea.
Absolutely, right? Yeah, so yeah, go global, go very big picture, and Taiwan's the #1 chip producer. But there's some geopolitical things happening with China, sort of threatening the recapture of Taiwan. That's has people a little bit nervous about potential microchip supplies for that everything that is these days, right? Your toaster probably has a microchip in it now, and so the United States is pouring some national money into big aid that's going into Central Texas for Samsung, and other chip manufacturers that are getting set up that already have operations here and are building new operations in Taylor. There's huge. Last week, another one announced for another big chip fab in Taylor. We're seeing,
And
you
by the way,
know,
just while we're on the subject of Taylor, have you driven out there into Taylor and seen it looks like a giant spaceship landed and cranes came in there holding it down. It's
it's amazing.
unbelievable.
It's amazing. John, do you remember Alcoa, which is a big aluminum
Yeah.
mining operation south of Rockdale? So they have, I think it's 68,000 acres. And so Alcoa would mine, uh, 1,000 acres at a time, and these were kind of strip mines where you drag and get the bauxite is what the name of the ore is that they can smelt and get aluminum. And then once they depleted that 1,000 acres, they would replant trees and go to the next 1,000 acres. And so um, they shut down a long time ago, but there's a big cooling lake, right? So that operations, it had its own cooling lake. It has huge amount of electricity that was being run to that site. And that site has recently turned and was sold last year to a big development conglomerate out of Dallas, Texas, who has recently announced that it's going to sort of be its own little city because they have so much electricity there. They're adding further power generation, and they're planning to be able to serve with that cooling lake to serve the needs of big data centers. And so this explosion of data centers, when you look at what's happening in computing today, and then everything that lives on the internet, and now what's happening with AI in the forefront of AI, these data centers are becoming a huge need and a big power consumer. And the state of Texas, really at the statewide, we're shining in that sense because the state of Texas has very affordable energy and electricity because of our access to natural resources and that natural gas and oil resources that Texas has. So the state, as far as the states go, have a lot of pretty good news moving forward into the future. And then Central Texas in our region, of course, are big beacons for high tech and what's
So
happening there.
if you drill this down, what does it mean for real estate sales and in Austin? And does
Yeah,
that
it
mean
just
is
means
there a bias to east of I-35 then too when it comes to newer
absolutely.
developments?
Yeah, yeah.
I've
I
read
mean,
lately that new permits for new construction are down. Household formations are up. There's obviously the whatever 4.5 months of inventory here in the Austin area. I'm just wondering what kind of effect that will have on that east side over there as they develop all of that land.
yeah, and it's, we were talking about scope, big picture, small picture from a geographic standpoint. Think of that also from a timeline standpoint. So the slowdown of permits, this is in 1 year increments. If we're looking in 1 year increments, we had a huge surge 3 years ago of building permits for single family homes and subdivisions, as well as multifamily apartments, these sort of super class A 200, 300 unit apartment complexes. Those have actually resulted in an oversupply. All of that started 3 years ago has resulted in an oversupply that we're dealing with today. So that's the today story in this 1 year timeline increment of having an oversupply. The new starts are down right now, and we're going to get into interest rates because I have some questions for you about the interest rate market and what's happening there. But interest rates are higher now than they were 3 years ago. So that faucet, that supply has
That's
turned
the
off.
understatement of the day. But
Yeah. But the speculative builders, both on subdivisions, single and detached housing, as well as the multifamily, they've stopped. They have stopped. We're dealing with the oversupply that started 3 years ago as it's being delivered to our market now. But really, a year and a half, 2 years ago, that faucet was turned off. And so that trough is moving through time. And in a year, we're going to start to experience the shortage or a swing back from that oversupply into, uh-oh, we didn't start enough homes 3 years ago, will be what we're saying at the end of next year and into 26. And so we'll see the opposite that's happening where that becomes an undersupplied situation that drives us back into heavy price appreciation.
do you
Um,
think that that's going to be similar to what we saw 3 years ago? I mean, 3 years ago
no,
was kind of crazy, and it was an
it,
anomaly for sure.
it wasn't an anomaly. I don't think we'll get that undersupplied, but we'll be somewhere between that and where we are now.
Yeah. Well, and I guess it depends on where interest rates go to. And, Austin has had a correction from that, from the big 2022 number, right? We have had a correction, probably upwards of 18, 19% down. If you look at the whole metro area, because that year was an anomaly. I hope that there will be enough inventory if once rates do come back down, demand picks back up, that we don't run into that same problem we had. If you think about it, there's a lot of people who missed out buying a house when rates were at 3.5%, 4%, and not because they didn't want to, it's just because there was no inventory to be had out there, right? And I remember that sellers were not being paying for title policy or surveys or things they typically pay for, they weren't doing, as opposed to now where, we call this the year of the concession, because pretty much all sellers out there are offering up concessions for their buyers. And a lot of times they use that in the form of, let's buy the rate down permanently and maybe even temporary, maybe a combination of hybrid loan could get their payment down as low as possible.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like we would rather just be consistent instead of have these swings up and down. Um, but the swings cause maybe some excitement. So it's a new thing day to day. You and I spoke by video yesterday, and you got me laughing right before we got on this call about how it's a whole new market today. Everything's changed. It's been 24 hours since we spoke.
Yeah.
Um, but it's kind of how it is. And we always, you and I have done radio and YouTube and all kinds of formats to update people on real estate for 18 years now. But a lot of times we come back to the weather. And last night I was catching up with my neighbors, just standing out in the driveway and catching up on things. And the clouds came in and a little patch of rain came through. And this is how our real estate market is too. And that it shifts quickly in Central Texas. It's very
Yeah.
similar to weather.
Well, let me tell you what may harken a little faster shift. The Fed, right? Unless you've been living in a hole or a cave for the last 2 months, you probably have heard that the Fed is most likely going to be lowering the Fed funds rate on September 18th, which is their next meeting. It's a Wednesday. It will happen about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. That's we all sit around our computers and wait to see what happens. Right now, there is a 25 basis points. It's pretty much a done deal. 100% chance they're going to lower it 25 basis points because of some previous economic news we had over the last 30 to 60 days. But what's interesting to see is that the market is also, I think, building in even a little bit more, and they're building it on hope. Hope that some economic news over the next 3 weeks before that Fed meeting will actually drive the Fed to lower rates even more by 50 basis points instead of the 25 basis points. And so that the market actually has that built into it. And I think a lot of this hopefulness came out of this revision of the last year's jobs report, which revised them down 818,000. Unemployment was actually up 818,000 people. They miscalculated.
Tell everybody from a relative sense, sort of how far does that go back of the last previous job reports that were reporting positive? And they weren't doing like positive a million or anything like that. These
From
reports.
my from my understanding, it goes back 12 months from that March revision. It goes back 12 months. So the whole 12 months worth of jobs reports that came out were essentially wrong, right? They showed a rosier picture. So the Fed was using that information to make policy of whether they should lower or raise or keep rates the same in each one of their meetings, right? And so maybe they took it a little too far. Maybe they should have lowered the Fed funds rate by 25 basis points in July instead of waiting till September to do it, right? You never know with economics, because what's happening right now, it doesn't really show its head for maybe 3 or 4 months. And so hopefully they're not behind the eight ball when it comes to this. Now, if the Fed says, let's look at all this economic data, let's look at that big giant jobs revision of 818,000 people, maybe we should do 50 basis points, right? Powell in his speech last Friday was very dovish on what he was talking about. He definitely said it's an end to raising, and we're taking a new trend towards lowering rates. So here's what's going to happen though, and I see it happen over the years. Every time the Fed lowers interest rates, you see social media go crazy, right? Social media will come up and say the Fed dropped rates, and in the mind of a consumer, they're thinking mortgage rates, right? Not anything else but mortgage rates. Well, if let's say that the Fed raises or lowers the Fed funds rate by 25 basis points on September 18th, and not the 50 that the market has probably built into now that they're hopeful for, we actually could see rates go up if the Fed lowered only 20, does lower just 25 basis points. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I'm saying there's a good likelihood because the market is really hoping for 50%, and there's some economic data that has shown that maybe they should do 50 basis points. I will tell you this morning, though, ongoing initial jobless claims came out this morning. It's a weekly number that comes out, and it was flat. And the market took it kind of badly that it was flat. I mean, it was basically just barely, it was right on forecast, right? And that right on forecast did not make the market happy. And our rates actually have probably come up a little bit, maybe 15 basis points or so from yesterday, an eighth to the cost. So let's see. Let's talk about the other economic news between now and when the Fed meets. First of all, there's tomorrow, and for anybody watching right now, today is August 27th. While we're doing this, tomorrow is August 28th. PCE, personal consumption expenditures, comes out tomorrow, and that's kind of the data point that the Fed really uses for inflation. So that's this Friday, right? That's tomorrow on August 28th. And then, all right, what is today? No, today, August 30th. Today's the 29th. Yeah, today's the 29th. And then next Friday is the monthly jobs report, right? It shows unemployment rate, job gains, things like that. That's the big non-farm payrolls report that everybody talks about. So then we have tomorrow, then we have next Friday, another big giant jobs report. And that next Friday one is September 6th. And then right after that, on September 11th, we have CPI, Consumer Price Index, that comes out, another big number. And then right after that, the Fed meets on the 18th of September. So we have this every week, Friday, Wednesday, and then the Fed, right? And so the market's really going to be watching what these economic indicators say over the next 3 weeks. First one to watch is that PCE one tomorrow. That's going to be a big one. That's on the 30th of August. And then CPI. If those numbers disappoint, you could see a bigger push towards 50 basis points from the Fed. Even people not being just hopeful, now being assured by this not good economic data coming out. Now, if we see it flat like we did today, that could signal the market's like, well, maybe there isn't 50. Maybe they are going to do 50 basis points. Maybe we'll only do 25. And so you may see rates creep up. But we're just going to have to watch the economic news. It's all about the data, right?
John, I'm going to kind of bring this back to why you've ended up being or sounding like an economist after doing this for 30 years.
I am not.
Well, I really appreciate your level of commitment to following this, because as a mortgage banker, what happens for me as a broker partner of yours, we have the same clients quite a bit, and you work with a lot of the top brokers in residential real estate across Austin and Central Texas. Often we call you, or we have clients that really need to have the advice as they're getting involved in a purchase now. So back to that timeline thing, say, hey, this 30 days matters to me. I don't find whatever real estate's going to do in 3 years. That's interesting, but I need to make a decision now. I'm going to buy a house. Do I lock my interest rate now, or we call float? Do I float and see if they're going to improve a little bit? And then also, you guys often will have some sort of a float down type of product to help a decision maker that's trying to figure out what to do. Maybe lock and then either pay a fee or float down and their interest rate for free if news comes out and the Fed says, hey, we're not.
And what you're talking about is, whenever we lock it. So if I'm in a market like today, where there's all this economic news coming out and there's a lot of uncertainty happen, I'm counseling my clients to go ahead and lock in. Because what you can always do is that if the market gets significantly better, you can always have a free float down from our company. We'll float you down close to market rate, right? So it's a hedge, right? Now, if you didn't lock the loan, and then all of a sudden rates go way up, you can't go back and say, well, I should have locked, but I didn't. Now you have to take the higher rate, right? So it's the float down options. It's very important. Now you talk about timing. I was talking to a friend this weekend who was really gung ho about buying a house. Him and his wife were like, they said, we want to get pre-qualified. Let's get this process started. This friend of mine I've had for years. And then on Monday, he calls me, he goes, John, we talked about it Sunday, And with this election, we have no idea what's going to go on with the election. We don't know what kind of policies are going to be out there. We're feeling really nervous about the uncertainty of the election. And then he said also now with Powell's speech on Friday, maybe they're going to lower it even more. Maybe we'll time it better by waiting till the end of the year after the election to have some certainty in the market and to maybe have a lower interest rate. Have you been seeing clients talk about this?
Yeah, I have a client that is also a lender, so that does like hard money or private loans for investor clients. So particularly like on flip type of houses where they buy a house at one price, do some construction dollars, and go back to sell the house as a flip. But he is a lender, so checking in with him on some projects, he said, "No, I'm pause button until after the election." And so it is that same element of uncertainty where um, people are making the decision to pause in some cases where they have the luxury of doing that. We still, internal to my office, we still have a bunch of transactions taking place because um, many people in their residential real estate don't have the option to pause, right? They are relocating to the Austin area and they need a place to live. They need shelter. Um,
Yeah, it's not like
or
buying Bitcoin, right? You don't have to have the Bitcoin, but you got to have a roof over your head.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's different degrees of that we would call, utility value of real estate. There's certainly some luxury value to real estate, depending on what kind of parcel you're looking at. Like let's say houses with swimming pools, right? So you have both utility of a roof over your head and the luxury of a swimming pool. And then there's also an investment category to real estate, and rightfully so. You compare it to Bitcoin when somebody's trying to decide how to invest $1 million and they're looking at, should I put it in Bitcoin or should I put it in real estate? They're going to be gauging on what type of appreciation exposure that they might have or cash flow opportunity. And so election years, they stimulate this sense of uncertainty and maybe the fear cortex of our brain or something as humans. But we see it every time that there's an election coming up. We'll see a slowdown of the number of transactions as we lead up to the election. This would be different from years when there's not an election. And then we also see this surge or this sort of pent up demand that's a return to action after the election.
Yeah,
It's not,
absolutely.
and it's funny because it's not correlated to outcome. It doesn't matter whether one party wins or another party wins. It's just the sort of fear cycle. I think the media latches
Well,
on
people
to.
know what to expect. They have certainty of what to expect, whichever party comes into power, right? They know what to expect at that point. But when that unknown is there, it's hard to make a financial and investment decision on something.
Yeah. Uh, and you and I went to a pretty nerdy luncheon where they spent a lot of time analyzing these outputs. And I came away from there, I think, with the realization one of the things that they weren't talking to us about is actually the Senate and the House of Representatives, and how really the chances of dramatic change in policy are not very high. No
Yeah.
matter what no matter what the outcome of a presidential election looks like, um, that those outcomes in the House and the Senate are going to give us a very much likely continuance of current policy, right? We're not going to see some dramatic change one way or the other.
Well, if you watch the news or the commercials and or YouTube or anything else out there, I'd say that it's definitely lowering consumer confidence at the moment. But what I do like what you said though, and I've seen this just like you've seen it over the years, is that after the election's over, that demand that would have been there up front has now been pulled back, until after the election. So I've been counseling. I would encourage any of our buyers or listeners that if you're not ready to buy right now, you're going to wait till after the election. Like you said, it takes off pretty quickly after the election. I would get your ducks in a row right now. Make sure you get pre-qualified for a mortgage. Get your searches set up with, on your MLS, and get ready to pull the trigger. Don't start the process after the election. Start the process now, and then just keep looking because that demand will hit, and it will hit hard afterwards.
Yeah, and it makes me think of Warren Buffett's advice about how to be a contrarian investor, that when everyone else is fearful, that's the time to be greedy. And when everyone else is greedy, that's the time to be fearful. And so, um, if we do have this pause, right, that's fear driven, that's uncertainty and fear driven leading up to the election, it may have been really set up for some good opportunity if you can be a contrarian investor for some interesting buying opportunity, and then to be into your new asset as that spring back coming out of the election into the next year when inventory comes back in line, interest rates are lower. That's the time that you would want to be owning real estate, not necessarily competing with those new buyers that are entering the market at that time.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. So what would you like to leave this week's show up with?
Well, the weather's breaking here in Austin, right? To the good. We have predictions of some scattered rain, which is good. My yard might make it through.
Starts
Football,
football starts tomorrow.
football starts.
I started
Yeah.
Saturday. Well, it already started for the UT. It started Saturday.
Yes, indeed. And we're back to school. So traffic patterns have changed in driving patterns. We're continuing. I just watched my office is in downtown. I just watched a Waymo car drive by with no one in it. So the
Wait,
times are getting
wait.
strange.
You're gonna have to tell me what a Waymo car is.
It's a little Chevrolet, I think, and it has cameras on each corner, and there's a big spinning thing at the top. And they have completed their beta test. They've been going around downtown in different routes with a driver who's not touching the steering wheel. You know, the driver's playing on their phone, maybe looking up every once in a while. But they have just transitioned into the phase where there's no driver inside the car. And it's pretty weird, John. I'll try to catch a video of these cars that are passing my office building with nobody in it. And we are in the future, my friend. We are.
Wow. Yeah, that would make me a little bit nervous walking around downtown. I mean, you got the scooter problem now. You got driverless cars hanging out
Driverless
down there.
cars. Yeah. It's
Driverless cars next to a scooter on some drunk person that's running red lights. That could be the
the
problem.
the world is changing. So, yeah, but yeah, so to leave it that we are changing on a daily basis as we started the show off, like today's different than yesterday. And so let's keep the frequency of these conversations up so that we can share our experiences with our viewers here and keep them up to speed on what's happening in Central Texas real estate.
Yeah, and I just want to leave off that September 18th is going to be a big day, I believe, for the economy and for perception and for consumers out there. You know, borrowing costs have gotten out of hand. You know, home equity line of credit now is 9.5, 10%. And that's right. That's tied directly to the Fed funds rate, actually. And so when those start to come down, it'll put more money in people's pockets. You know, we're getting people to start refinancing right now, actually, because rates have come down enough into the low sixes and sometimes high fives that you can put extra $150 in their pocket a month, maybe even more, maybe $400 or $500, depending on the loan amount. And everybody needs a little bit of extra cash flow right now. We've been, you know, we're on our third calendar year or second calendar year of really low demand in housing, right, and really high interest rates. It's time for this cycle to end, and I think it is ending. And I think we're going to have a great 2025. Of course, we're going to talk before that, but keep an eye on all that economic news coming out, Kevin.